So starting off here at the outer gateway to Linlithgow Palace, and this was built in the 1530s, about 1535, by one of our kings, who was James V of Scotland, who happened to have been born here at Linlithgow Palace. And he had a daughter, and she was Mary, Queen of Scots, or Mary Stuart, and she was born here also at Linlithgow Palace. Now, the outer gateway, that's what it's called, because there's an inner gateway further in, just before you get into the palace. So if you look above, you will see 4 medallions. Now, these medallions stand for various orders of chivalry. If you think of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, you're getting there to what this is about in a way, because on the left-hand side, it's an honorary title given by the monarch, is the Order of the Garter, which is one of the 3 lions there, gold lions on the far left-hand side. And these were all honours that James V had. And just next to that one is the Order of the Thistle, which is the Scottish version, if you like, Knights of the Thistle, as they're called. And the next one, and this one is the Order of the Golden Fleece of Burgundy. And if you look closer, you'll see at the bottom there is a sheep or a ram there, just hanging towards the bottom of it. Very elegant, very nice. Amazingly sculpted. And on the right-hand side is the Order of St. Michael of France. And again, the Stuart monarchs, of course, James V had married a French woman, Mary of Guise, who was going to be the mother of Mary, Queen of Scots. So the French connection with Scotland was very important. So not surprising you've got that there. Now here...
And it's fair to say that French was very widely spoken here in Scotland as well.
Yes, yes. And the palace interior is closed just now because of COVID. And the gates, as you can see, pretty secure. But we're not going to tell you anything about what you can't really see, because as Blue Badge guides, we are guiding in location, and we're describing what you're seeing. So that we'll be doing that more next week. Now you can see it is quite fortified. This would be a kind of gun loop, where you would be watching to see who was coming towards you, and for added security these gun loops would be positioned there, and they were functional. These were built at a time when people were throwing musket balls and all sorts of armaments at fortified residences, so these were very important to have these
turbulent times, I guess,
gun loops there. In later buildings, and sometimes in the 17th century, they appear as decorative features, but not here. These were to be used if they had to be. Now here is this beautiful church. This is called St. Michael's Church, and this was built in the 15th century by James III, who was before James V, of course, and very old church, and it's still used today for worship. And looking carefully at the stonework, you may see, if Joe can take a little peek through the gates, and you can see here we've got these ribbons for the people who have lost people during COVID. Sad. But through the gates you can see the impressions on the stonework, like these round, like huge bullet holes. And these were where musket balls and cannonballs had been fired at the palace and also here at St. Michael's Church. St. Michael, patron saint of Linlithgow, and the motto of Linlithgow is to welcome strangers with kindness. So a very nice saint to have as your patron saint.
And we have these little medallions all around the town here, which you get a map and you follow these medallions. I've got St. Michael there, and you can go on a little tour around the village itself.
There's so much to see here, and sometimes it's a bit of a hidden gem because many people that visit Scotland sometimes bypass Linlithgow. They'll visit Edinburgh Castle, they'll visit Stirling Castle, and then they'll go and look for Nessie up in Inverness and miss out this very, very important gem. Now, looking higher up, you may see a very worn figure statue on the top of that buttress, and that again is St Michael. And that one goes back to 15th century, would you believe? Just incredible. But we have got a questionable addition on this building. And if you look up the top there, you'll see something very shiny and modern, which is a spire. Now, back at the time of this church being founded in the 15th century, there was what was called a crown spire, and anybody that's visited Edinburgh may be familiar with St Giles and that open crown spire. Well, that's what was here up until the 18th century, but one stormy night, wind, hail, the very worst you can get in Scottish weather, caused the original spire to deteriorate, and it had to be taken down in the 19th century because for people's safety as bits were falling off it. So it was replaced in 1964 by this aluminium version of a spire designed by Sir Basil Spence, who was quite a well-known architect of the time, and it's based on the crown of thorns. Okay, so that really lets you know you are in Linlithgow, because that aluminium spire can be seen from quite far away.
Miles away.
Even passing in the train or whatever, you can see in the distance shining in all its glory.
And it was lowered into place by a helicopter.
Right, yes, absolutely, yeah.
Because this palace has got great association with the Stuarts as well. Mary Queen of Scots was also born here.
That's right, and you've got your kind of typical, what we call royal borough, because Linlithgow is remarkable in that it was a small market town which became a very important royal borough, and the royal borough was a seat for kingship. It had international trading rights. It was quite a wealthy place. There was lots of merchants stayed here, and it followed the traditional plan, like Edinburgh's Old Town, where you've got your palace or castle at the top. You've got your church, like St Giles, and here we've got St Michael's, and then you start going downhill, and you come across hidden little narrow streets. You come to a trading area, and Joe will be talking about some of the market occupations that went on around the cross as we go downhill. So very much traditionally a royal borough. A royal borough had rights over customs, over taxes, over imprisonment, people's behaviour. It had rights over that. So it was a concept that was introduced by King David I in the 12th century when this place developed as a royal borough. But we'll tell you more about that on some of our later visits.
Now, on the wall here, we've got a story that unfolds as you walk down here, and it's really the connection of Queen Elizabeth II and the bloodline going all the way back to Mary Queen of Scots. So it's a succession from Mary Queen of Scots, who was born in Linlithgow Palace, to the current Queen, and it's not the history of the monarchs. A lot of people get confused with this. It's actually the history of the bloodline. Some of the bloodline I think is a wee bit tenuous, Mike. And what about you?
There's no George, well, we have got George III here, but there's no George IV.
No George
so
IV.
That just shows you it's not the as Joe was saying, as the monarchy, the line of monarchs.
Yeah, there was no Charles I, no Charles II, no James VII. So it's not about the lineage of the monarchs. It's a bloodline going from Mary Queen of Scots right to Elizabeth II.
And there's one notable omission here, of course. Remember our favourite king, very briefly king, who was King Edward VIII, who met up with Wallace Simpson and had to give up his throne.
Yeah, kind of like the ones who are in California at the moment.
That's right.
History repeated itself.
It repeats itself. History repeats itself. Certainly does. Yeah.
Just a little background on the word Linlithgow itself. Where does it come from? Well, Lyn is the old Brythonic, which is of the Welsh type of language. Lyn, if you go to Wales, all the lakes are called Lyns. So the Lyn relates to the loch that's here at the palace as well. Now, Lithgow, we'll try to look into a bit of that. Lithgow can translate as the greyhound or the hollow.
We'll just take a wee swing around again. You maybe get a better view of the spire
Yeah,
that we were talking about earlier on.
And you can see how that was a very modern addition to the ancient building. But also have a look at the cobblestones here as well, because it's also been done in the old cobbles. You know how people from Glasgow are called Glaswegians? People from Edinburgh are called Edinburghers. People from London are Londoners. People from Liverpool are Liverpudlians. Well, the people from the Linlithgow are known as black bitches. Nothing to do with gender and nothing to do with race. And they actually wear that title with pride. And the reason is, one of their mottos, they've got two coats of arms here. One is of St. Michael. St. Michael is kind to strangers. Another one is of a black bitch. And the story goes back in the, I think it was the 1300s, 1400s. There was a young man who committed a crime, and he was sentenced to be put on an island in the middle of the loch, and he was sentenced to starve to death. So he's put on the island, and then weeks went past, and the locals were getting quite suspicious because he seemed to be thriving quite a lot. So they set up a watch party, and they noticed that his favourite greyhound, who was a black greyhound, was actually bringing food across to the island for him every night. And so the powers that be decided to punish the dog as well. So they put the dog on another island, and they chained it to a tree so the dog couldn't get fed, and the dog could not take the food to the young gentleman who was sentenced to death. And so they made, because of the loyalty that the dog showed to the master, they made the dog part of their coat of arms. And we'll see that as we go around the village. You'll see emblems here. So here we've got the little museum here. If you want to go into the borough halls, the borough halls are part, you'll see it from the front as well. There's a little cafe in here, and there's studios in here, and it's used by the locals as a meeting place. I do remember my brothers and sisters used to come to discotheques here in the borough halls, back when they had discotheques. Remember them, Mike?
Yes, I do. I'm looking at something that's blocked up here, which may people kind of miss, and it's where the debtors' prison.
Yeah, this
used
here
to be.
was the place where trials would take place. We'll see it from the front. It's where trials would take place. It was a debtors' prison. We've mentioned the debtors' prisons before. In fact, we talked about them last week, about one of the characters we mentioned who ended up in a debtors' prison. And we always talk about Charles Dickens' father was in a debtors' prison. Well, this is with Linlithgow. This would be the civic centre of the town. So it was where they would keep all the weighing beams. This would be the cross. That's where they would have the markets. They would have the public executions in front of this building as well. And you know, you've got the word kirk there. Kirk is the old Scottish word for church. Now we're coming into the square proper. Some people sitting here enjoying the sunshine. It's not too bad when you're out of the wind. It's not too bad at all. Now the original hall goes back to the 1400s, but that was destroyed in a fire, and this was rebuilt in the 1800s. Popular place for people to come in and get married, to get the photograph taken on the steps. So we'll just take a little walk over, Mike, and we'll get it from the front.
You've got the Saltire, Scotland's national flag flying away there.
Yeah, and actually Mike and I should have been in New York this weekend, Mike, shouldn't we?
Absolutely, yeah.
For a tartan day, for the parade down 6th Avenue, because tomorrow, the 6th of April, is the anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Arbroath. It's 701 years since the Declaration of Arbroath, when Scotland declared its independence. And we normally go to New York at this time of the year, but unfortunately can't go there. But we're looking forward to next year. And Mike's going to bring his bagpipes, and we'll see us in Bryant Park we'll set up a place in Britain. Come and visit us.
Yeah, my son, he plays the drum, and he's hoping to come Magnus as well.
It'd be great. It is lovely.
So.
Yeah, I've been there for the last 4 or 5 years. Unfortunately, couldn't do last year and couldn't do this year. But I know that the American Scottish Foundation are doing a virtual tour, or a virtual parade. So if you want to go into the American Scottish Foundation, then you can see the parades from previous years as well. We've probably got a good view of the borough halls here. So it's a cafe, it's got a garden at the back, a beautiful garden at the back. There's a little museum.
And these pediments, there's lots of really decorative features, isn't there, in the little pediments above the windows
the crown,
there.
The thistle, the fleur-de-lis, because of the connection with Mary Queen of Scots and Marie de Guise to get the fleur-de-lis. In the middle, you see the black vetch. It's a symbol of black vetch. And it says, "My fruit is fidelity to God and the King." Well, it says the Queen because that was under Victoria. And then on the other side you get the English rose as well, because obviously under James VI we had the Union of the Crowns.
This is something else, this well, this sculpted well. Isn't it?
It's a lovely piece of sculpture here. And when you look at it, it's actually redesigned in 1800s, but this is actual cross. This is the cross. This is where the people will come and do all the trading. This is the market cross here. And it is a fountain, and you can see some of the characters are quite nice. These medieval characters. There's one of them we noticed that one of them looks like he's actually flashing, isn't he? He's opened his.
Yeah, around the other side.
We'll show him.
We'll go around and show you that one.
Yeah, and then you get little devils here, sprouting water.
Yeah.
Now, just opposite, there is a white house here, called the Cross House.
Yeah, I think that's the one we were talking about. That one.
Yeah, because he looks like he's flashing. He looks like the court jester flashing at the royals, doesn't he? Like he's showing his knickers to the royals.
Of course, this was damaged, wasn't it, by Oliver Cromwell?
Cromwell's troops.
The same guy that you saw the big cannonball marks up at the St Michael's Kirk.
Yeah,
so
Oliver Cromwell did not do us any favours.
No,
at all. Up here in Scotland.
Yeah.
But if you look at the White House over here, this White House was owned by a woman. Her brother was a governor, I believe, of Carolina. His name was Glenn. And when Bonnie Prince Charlie rode into town, she was such a big supporter that she made the fountain flow with wine to celebrate Bonnie Prince Charlie. That's a big supporter. Eh?
Incredible.
A lot of money to spend. But again, this is open to the public. This is the Cross House here as well. Lots of historic living. Linlithgow has got such a civic background as well, because this used to be the county town of Linlithgowshire, and this is where all the major trials would take place up until about the 1960s, when they developed the town of Livingston, the new town of Livingston, and all of the civic duties and all the civic apparatus got moved over to Livingston itself. And this here was what's left of an old pub that used to stand here. Look at the plaque up here. It goes back to 1675, and it was reckoned to be one of the oldest pubs in this area as well. And this is all that remains of the old pub that stands here.
It's quite good to have these fragments, you know, the decorative fragments, to keep them, and they put them into newer buildings. I believe this is 1960s, which is not always everybody's choice of architecture.
Well, I think they call this 60s brutalism.
Yeah. Brutalism, yeah.
But you can see the Victorian buildings here as well. Now we'll just take a wee walk down here. Now we mentioned the Stuarts. Of course, Mary Stuart got a lot to do with this here, and James V as well. James V, shall we say, was a bit of a lad in his day. He was known as the good man of Ballingeith. Ballingeith is a place at the back of Stirling Castle, and it's said that James V would dress up as a normal citizen of the day, and he would go down and go out with the local ladies. So he only had one legitimate offspring, and that was Mary Queen of Scots. But I believe he had about 8 or 9 illegitimate children as well. Yeah. And one of the illegitimate children that he had was the Earl of Moray. That was a half-brother to Mary Queen of Scots. So Mary had quite a few half-brothers. And in those days, if you were an illegitimate offspring of the monarch, you could get taken into the church. You can get hidden. You were given a title in the church. You could become a cardinal somewhere. The church is very good at hiding the monarch's illegitimate offspring.
Yeah. In fact, you're talking about these royals going in disguise like ordinary people, but I believe the Queen, before her coronation, or maybe it was, no, it wasn't. It was actually after the war. When the war had finished, she went out with Princess Margaret, and they just put on their headscarves and blended in with the general public, and went out and took part in the celebrations.
That's right.
And Princess Diana and Fergie, I believe, played a bit of a trick on Prince Andrew, where they both dressed up as policewomen.
That's right.
And went into this pub where Prince Andrew was having his bachelor party, and pretended to break it up. And they were actually, for 1 minute, they were arrested as posing as police. Maybe if I'll swing that around.
The story also goes that when they were up in Balmoral, they didn't like staying in Balmoral, so they would stay in the local hotel and go to the local pubs in Ballater as well.
Yeah. We're going to talk about this here, which is a major event in Scottish history that happened in Linlithgow. And this guy is called James Stewart, and he was Earl of Moray. He was a half-brother of Mary Queen of Scots, and he was quite a fan of Mary Queen of Scots. He was over in France, and he was a pal of the family, and had a lot to do with the management of Mary's marriage to the Dauphin of France. Of course, the Dauphin of France died tragically, and Mary had to come back to Scotland, and he was still on her side, but she made a bit of a mistake, and she married this guy called Henry Stewart, Lord Darnley, who James Stewart didn't get on with too well, and he thought that Mary was going too much in terms of Catholicism, where Scotland had changed to be Protestant, and he was known as a Lord of Congregation, a friend of John Knox in the Reformation, to change from Catholicism to Presbyterianism. So James Stewart, he was while they were still friendly, Mary Queen of Scots gave him the title of Earl of Moray, and he was on his journey around this area. He was at Stirling Castle meeting with some people, and then he was meeting with more people from Stirling, and he was on his way to Edinburgh, and he was stopping here at Linlithgow one evening, and there was an attempt on his life. Well, when I say an attempt on his life, what happened was this guy called James Hamilton and of Bothwell Hall, James Hamilton of Bothwell Hall, they were great fans, friends, supporters of Mary Queen of Scots. And by this time, Mary Queen of Scots in 1567 had to abdicate, and it was all to do with conspiracies and her religion and so on. And she was out of the picture. She was under house arrest at this time. And this guy had made himself regent. The child of Mary Queen of Scots, who was going to be James VI, was too young to take the throne, so this guy was ruling. And he was a confidant of Queen Elizabeth I as well, of England. Anyway, he was coming out of his meeting, and it was just at this area here. There was a street here, a narrow street with houses. And James Hamilton crept up the stairs into a stairwell, and he had a gun, a carbine, a 3-foot kind of carbine, which would be quite a long weapon, and he got the carbine, pointed it out of a window through very narrow slatted window, because they had these kind of slatted or you know what I mean, wooden shutters back then, and he was peering through the shutters, and there was also a lot of white sheets. People were drying their washing, and this was very convenient to James Hamilton. And what happened next is he shot Regent Moray. He shot James Stewart in the stomach several times, and James Stewart eventually died. James Hamilton made his escape down the stairwell, and the sheets, the washing, had tended to absorb the smoke, if you get the idea, from the people in the street. So they heard the shot, and it must have been something like, I don't like to mention it, but I'll mention it. It's like President Kennedy's assassination, where everybody would be looking to see where that shot had been fired from. But it was too late, because James Hamilton had got onto his horse and away at the gallop, and they couldn't catch him. This is a major event. It was the first political assassination, not just in Scotland, but in the wider world. It was an iconic moment, and Queen Elizabeth I of England was absolutely shaken to the foundations that something like this would happen. James Hamilton went through various stages in his life, and he more or less got off with it, although he was held to account on various times, but there was no absolute concrete proof. But then the Hamilton family were huge supporters of Mary Queen of Scots, and to this day they hold the weapon that assassinated the Earl of Moray, James Stewart, in Linlithgow in the 20th of January 1570. So there's a moment for you.
Yep. And Murray was a thorn in the side of Mary, for all of, because he was the one that handed over the casket of letters.
Yeah.
To implicate her in the conspiracy to get rid of Elizabeth I. So half brother, half sister. Talk about sibling rivalry, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, you didn't want to crush your brothers and sisters in those days.
Amazing. And who had started off as a confidant and a dear friend and relation, completely turned against
went over to
her.
France and spent time in France with the De Guise family, and went to the wedding, and
also implicated in the assassination of David Rizzio, who was Mary Queen of Scots' Italian secretary.
That's right.
All sorts of conspiracies, and Darnley as well. So we're going to pass
I think
over.
it was the final straw was when she married Bothwell, the third one. I have to say, Mary was not very good in her choices of husbands, was she?
She was certainly not. I don't think there's ever been a successful film made, because the story is so amazing of Mary Queen of Scots. It would take I don't know if it will ever be a very successful film made of that story. Now, what we've got here...
I mean, we still hold in high regard in terms of the romance of the whole thing, but at the same time...
What we've got here is Tam Dael House, the Dael family, a famous family going back to Covenanting times in the 17th century. And the House of the Binns, which is very close to Linlithgow, is the oldest continuously occupied house in Scotland by the same family, Tam Dael. He died just about a couple of years ago. He was MP for West Lothian. He
was a very highly regarded
Very highly regarded. He was a bit of a maverick, because he never would really follow the party line. He was of aristocratic family, and you'd expect he would be a conservative, but he wasn't. He was Labour. He was socialist, and he sent his children to the state school. In fact, I taught his daughter art, because I taught at the nearby town of South Queensferry. So Tam Dael, very highly thought of. I won't go into too much detail, but it was around the time of Margaret Thatcher, and he was quite a controversial figure. He was quite outspoken about various issues during the war with Argentina. But
he also wasn't. He wasn't a big supporter of Scottish devolution. He always had that question he came up with. He almost tried to scupper it. It was called the West Lothian question after Tam Dael.
That's absolutely right. Now, what I'd like to talk about, and there is a statue of Mary Queen of Scots in this museum here, but there is also an exhibit on Scotty. If you know who I mean, Scotty from Star Trek, the Scottish engineer, Montgomery Scott, was born, or is to be born, in Linlithgow in 2222. We're waiting on that event. Now, this will mean absolutely nothing if you're not a follower of Star Trek.
You're not a
But
Trekkie.
it was the most successful science fiction series of the 1960s. And the lady who wrote the character of Scotty, Dorothy Fontana, decided that he was going to be born here in Linlithgow. Now, the man that played Scotty was James Doohan. And James Doohan was Irish, Canadian. he lived in Canada, and he was one of the most clever people at accents and voices. And they were wondering what nationality to give the chief engineer, who to begin with was a minor character in Star Trek. And he said, it's got to be Scottish. He's an engineer, he's got to be a Scotsman. And he played that part so well that from a minor character he became one of the main characters. He sadly died a number of years ago, but he did visit Linlithgow, and his family have visited here, and the exhibition his son has visited also. Now, Scotty's last wishes were that his ashes should be taken into space, and there were several attempts made, several failed attempts with rockets going up with his ashes, but one very special occasion by someone who visited the space station, International Space Station, was able to place his ashes and his picture secretly under the floor of the International Space Station. So Scotty got his last word in, he got his last wish fulfilled. So I bet you didn't expect that as a character in the Linlithgow.
So he did get beamed up after all.
Did get beamed up, yeah. But Mary Queen of Scots is a nice kind of social history of Linlithgow in this museum, which just opened in 2019. And a nice statue of Mary Queen of Scots. And I think Joe's maybe giving you a view of the cross and the fountain and the townhouse. Beautiful day, and if you look up the Kirk Gate you can see up to Linlithgow Palace. Yep. So we're going to talk about another character here, and we've got the Four Marys pub, and I think Joe will tell you who the Four Marys were first of all.
Well, there was a wee song we used to get at school, which is not quite right. We used to call it Mary Beaton, Mary Seaton and Mary Carmichael and me. But it's Mary Beaton, Mary Seaton, Mary Fleming and Mary Livingston. And these were the four ladies in waiting that Mary took with her to France, and they were with her when she got beheaded as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I've taken another thing I must mention is Outlander. I've taken Outlander fans here because they used Linlithgow Palace, various sequences in Outlander, and it was also used in The Outlaw King, the biopic of Robert Bruce. But the Four Marys, nice little pub in normal times, nice bar meals and so on. But I want to talk about above here, because an important character from the 19th century called David Waldie. He was born in Linlithgow, and he had his workshop just above the pub, and he was a medical man. He was a pharmacist, and he was also a surgeon. He went to Edinburgh Medical School and trained as a surgeon. He went and worked in Liverpool, and he eventually ended his days in Calcutta in India. But before that, he did one of the most important things, and that was to realise the anaesthetic properties of chloroform. Now, you may be a bit confused because we normally talk about James Young Simpson as having discovered that process in terms of childbirth, in terms of pain relief. But this was the real man who discovered it. And very conveniently, James Young Simpson in his writings did not give this guy the credit that he really deserved. So there is another hidden gem.
Little hidden gem.
That we are covering, David Waldie.
Well, Simpson then went on to be the anaesthetist to Queen Victoria.
Yes.
So he took the
credit.
glory. Yeah.
I think Simpson was quite a colourful character as well. Maybe had something to do with it. But this guy had his pharmacy up here, and he would be doing his experiments as well. And
nice to have your pharmacy above a pub.
Above a pub, yes. Well, Linlithgow is known to this day for pharmaceuticals too, as one of the industries, and many different types of industries also, to do with cloth, to do with textiles, to do with dyeing, and explosives even. It's got a connection with. And here we
also, Oracle is based here as well.
Sorry?
Oracle, technology company.
Oracle, yes,
yeah,
yes.
One of the biggest.
If you can think about Edinburgh, you've got the Royal Mile. Well, it doesn't look too much like the Royal Mile because there's been so much improvement and modern houses put in here, but this was like Linlithgow's Royal Mile, and close by here behind the houses on the right is the River Avon with its canal as well, Union Canal. So it had a lot going for it in terms of industry and trade. You can see the very random shaped stones and the close-step gables, and there's even a pigeon loft, if you can see the little square.
The white bit?
Yeah, the white bit there with the three little grills, obviously not for pigeons today. These grills are grilled over. And you can see some, I think, jackdaws. These jackdaws, I think, with the black hooded, yeah, kind of hooded. And that has been restored and it's protected, fortunately. 17th century merchants' houses. Just amazing. Incredible.
And these people would be trading with the palace as well, so they would get a lot of the business at with the palace as well.
Yes.
Sort of custom.
Oh yeah, yeah. And in fact, the early connections with trade was skins. I think sheepskins, leather was exported out of here. There's a lot of shoemaking. And leather work went on in Linlithgow.
I guess it's Bindi here in Linlithgow.
Yeah. So we've got this one. This is where we're going to finish our tour today. Is at this little statue. This is the well here, St Michael's Well. And if you remember what we said before about the motto of Linlithgow is St Michael is kind to strangers, right? I must actually mention a contemporary connection with Linlithgow before we finish. And
just want to show, just under there you can see the story of the black bitch being attached to the tree as well, on the coat of arms.
That's right.
And we've got St Michael. So Linlithgow is one of the few towns in Scotland to have two coats of arms.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll say a final one because touching on contemporary events, because we're going through an election currently, preparing for an election, and one of the parties is a new party called Alaba. And that party was formed by one Alex Salmond, and Alex Salmond was born here in Linlithgow also.
That's right, he was, yeah.
But we'll not talk anymore about politics, but that is just another character.
You get fined if you talk about politics, Michael. I said that last week.
Yeah.
You get fined 6p if you talk about politics.
So we won't do that. But yeah, so Linlithgow's got many, many connections, and a beautiful little town it is. So when you come to Scotland, a nice place to visit, for sure.